All right, guys, this is Norwell Central coming back at you in the YouTube video, and I really appreciate all the love and support so far on my YouTube channel. It's been a great experience to have Florida State football finally coming back. And I know it's Thursday as I'm recording this. I'm going to have this out tonight as I'm going to be able to go over some of the game preview of New Mexico State on the Great CW network. But I'm super excited to have just this opportunity to talk about Florida State again because it's been a long, long offseason, and 7 wins in 2 years is not going to cut it. So let's hopefully get back on the right track as we go throughout the 2026 year. I am going to be traveling tomorrow, so I won't be able to have much up tomorrow. Hopefully, I might have a little bit more up on Sunday, hopefully. I'm going to be at the game in Doak Campbell Stadium on Saturday night, so it's going to be a great environment. I might try to see if I can pre-record something for one of those 2 days and then maybe have a reaction piece maybe on Sunday or Monday. I'll get back to you on that. But I appreciate all the love and support so far. I know I've had about 2,300 subscribers so far. My Instagram account is at about 32,100. My Twitter account's at about 7,500. TikTok is kind of getting up there at 1,400. And I think Facebook is also at 7,000 as well. So it's a great thing for Florida State football so far. We're basically elevating and climbing up together. And even though you might not agree with Norvell and how his tenure is going to go at Florida State, we can all agree on one thing. We're passionate about Florida State. We want to see them successful, and we want to see them on the right foot. But so guess what? We're having New Mexico State come into Doak Campbell Stadium on Saturday night in the Great CW Network at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. It's going to be a great thing for Florida State fans to kind of get Florida State back on track and hopefully seeing Chief Osceola and Renegade being able to plant the spear at midfield, having a lot of your Florida State community together in the stadium having the war chant is going to be a great thing. And even that traditional garnet and gold you're going to see on the field is going to be great with the garnet end zones as we know and love. But I know Florida State fans are super excited to get back, and I know it's not going to be a LSU opener or something like that, even Alabama season opener like you had last year. But New Mexico State brings a new challenge, and you want to be ready for that Labor Day night game in the next week against an SMU, who I think is a very talented team. They're a top 25 opponent that we're going to be there. We're not going to talk about them just yet, but I do think there are some things that you have to worry about with New Mexico State. Not really worry about, but just kind of being monitored up. So the first thing is their quarterback, Trey Hendon. He's a Furman transfer. He had 17 touchdowns last year, 13 interceptions. He's very turnover prone. Had 6 fumbles last year, negative yardage and rushing. Also had 6 rushing touchdowns. He does a lot of quarterback sneaks and different things, short yardage stuff. But a lot of things that I wonder too is him being turnover happy. And I kind of look at this as like, last year New Mexico State was 118th in the country in sacks allowed, and they allowed so many different sacks last year at 2.83 sacks per game. That can spell a great thing for guys like Mandrell and Daryl Desir, Kevin Wynn, Rylan Kennedy, Diamante Diggs, Daniel Lyons. The list goes on and on with getting some of those guys. And yeah, I mean, Rylan Kennedy was one of those guys they brought in from the transfer portal, one of their only recruits in terms, or one of their only transfers in terms of the defensive end spot. And it's a guy that hasn't really been super productive, even at a school like A&M. He only had 3.5 career sacks. And last year at Florida State, Mandrell Desir was your top sack getter at 6.5. And 5 of those last 6 sacks that he had was in the last 6 games. And you want to see more production from your defensive line because your next sack getter past Mandrell Desir was an Ashton Barker, and he had 3.5 sacks. So it's like you need to see more production there. I think one of the bigger things that I'm really worried about with this defensive line this year is they don't have a Daryl Desir. They don't have a 6'5", 337-pound defensive lineman that's clogging up the middle of the field. And I get it. Kevin Wynn's a very talented guy. He's a former 4-star prospect out of the 25 class. They really like him, but they haven't talked about him much in fall camp. That concerns you a little bit. And I know it's not going to be a New Mexico State team that's going to wow you because they were last in the FBS in rushing yards per game. They actually added a guy from Delaware State in James Jones. Not that James Jones, another one. He actually had 958 yards and 9 touchdowns last year. He's pretty productive at that classification. But I just wonder how Florida State's going to be able to establish, and kind of force them to be able to throw the football and kind of get those turnovers you definitely need against an inferior opponent. So I wonder how everything's going to kind of factor into that because if Florida State's able to kind of establish the rush defense this year, that could be great. I know one thing we talked about last year, one of the bigger wins they had, or the biggest win they had, was when they beat Alabama in the season opener. They beat them by 2 touchdowns. But if they would have had any kind of a pulse in rushing the football, they probably would have beat Florida State. But unfortunately, that was not how it turned out for the Crimson Tide. Now you're having to go to Alabama. You're having to play at Miami. You're having to play Clemson, Louisville, Florida again, that Jaden Baugh had over 225 yards. You're having teams on your schedule that know how to run the football. And I'm not going to take anything away from this team, but you want to see them being kind of successful and that being able to run the football and getting after the quarterback. If you have a team that's kind of last or close to the bottom of the whole entire country in sacks allowed, yeah, they brought in a couple of pieces on their offensive line, but this is a New Mexico State team that you should take advantage of. You're a 31-point favorite, and you probably should be a little bit more favored if you didn't do so terrible last year to end the year. So I do think this is going to be a factor that Florida State's got to hang on to. But I want to talk about something else too, because their safety, one of their top guys in Aya, who actually will miss the season with a ruptured liver, and I hate to hear about that because I don't want to see anybody hurt. That is a tough, ask for an injury. He had 52 tackles last year. He had 4 interceptions. He was a very productive guy for this team, and having that guy that Deuce Robinson, a Mekhi Danzy, other guys, Jason Lopez, other guys like that have want to be successful in this offense and kind of take the top off the defense. That's a big loss for them. You want to see how they can kind of react to that. And you never want to see guys hurt. I wish he would be able to play in this game and be healthy because you never want to see guys like that get into a situation. And I wish them all nothing but the best, a speedy recovery because I know that injury stinks. But, Florida State wants to run the football. So while they have their top safety out, they have a linebacker that had 93 tackles last year, 3 interceptions, 4 forced fumbles. This is a guy that was very productive. But this is also a New Mexico State team that has literally won 8 games twice since 1960. They had a 10-win season in 1960, and then they had another 10-win season in 2023 when they had Diego Pavia. And Pavia is not walking through that building anymore. And this is a team that really has to kind of set itself back. Tony Sanchez has done a decent job at New Mexico State trying to build the foundation there. But I think that this is a big concern for them is their defensive line. They have no size. Their top guy is a guy from Tennessee Tech in Jeremiah Sanderford, who's 290 pounds. He had about 12 tackles last year. And this is a New Mexico State team that just had 19 sacks last year. That's it, 19 sacks. They were one of the worst teams in the country in being able to generate sacks. You thought Florida State was bad in terms of their defensive line, only having 18 sacks in 12 games. Well, they had 19 sacks all year as a team. I mean, that is pretty bad. So Florida State wants to run the football. You have guys like Usman Kroma, Sam Singleton, Trey Wisner. You have guys, a 3-headed monster. We'll see how that works out. But Cam Martin has kind of had that eligibility thing where he has talked about workhorse backs, having a 1,000-yard rusher in each of the past 4 seasons. He wants to have a guy that wants to run the football. And I think it could be a great thing for Florida State if Kroma is your guy. But you also have that freshman All-American they talk about all the time in Sam Singleton, who's a starting kickoff returner along with Mekhi Danzy, as well as can kind of be that guy there. You don't want to forget about him because guess what happened in that Wake Forest game? He had over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he was kind of that reason we won in such big fashion in 42-14 in that later home game. But I just think overall, though, with Deuce Robinson, I know he had a kind of a slower start. He didn't do too much against Alabama. He had a big game against East Texas State. And then also with, East Texas A&M, and then also with Kent State, he didn't really have that much of a game either. He kind of came on later in the year, and you're hoping that now he's back at Florida State. He's returning because he wants his draft stock to get a little bit higher. I think this is going to be a big game for him. Maybe 7 receptions, 84 yards, and a touchdown. I think it'd be reasonable for him. I think it can be, but this team's got to be able to score. You got to put teams away. You got to finish in the red zone. There are a lot of different things that I can go through with this team that I think they have to be able to do. And I just wonder how this is going to be. You talk about every time about the defensive line, but what about the linebackers? You have a guy in Chris Jones who you brought in from Southern Miss, 135 tackles last year at Southern Miss. Ole Miss wanted him. They signed him. And then next thing you know, you weren't able to get him. And, he was able to come back and be able to be at Florida State and everything. Then you got Jabril Rawls, Ashton Barker, Quindarius Jones, Nehemiah Chandler. There's a lot of guys out there that I think Florida State can kind of hang their hat on the secondary. And then turning over to the special teams. Gabe Panikowski, they talk about him being able to kick between 45 and 55 yards. We've heard that before with Jake Weinberg. We'll see how that goes as he transferred over to Miami. He just didn't have the accuracy. He can kick it as far as you want to, but you didn't know where it was going to end up. Daniel Hughes, he led the country last year in net yardage. So I think that there could be a big thing in terms of being in the transfer portal and why people don't want to talk about punters. that could be a great field position for this defense to kind of set your offense back up for some great field position themselves. And then the other thing is too, having Jason Lopez as the punt returner, and then also turning over the kickoff returners. Like I said before, you have to have some kind of special team success. I don't want to be going to Raleigh, North Carolina ever again and seeing Squirrel White muff a punt and then going off of KJ Kirkland's helmet. We don't need to see that anymore. And I think it comes to a point where Florida State's got to be consistent. They need to see this. They need to see the success, the wins, the big wins, the easy wins. This is a team that you should be able to take advantage of. Do not give them any kind of hope. Doak Campbell Stadium wants to see an easy win. We want to see most of these fans coming out of here in the third quarter smiling and laughing and saying, we're ready for SMU next week on Labor Day night. In a primetime game, Florida State's going to have a game under their belt. SMU is not. And you want to see them be successful. So I think a lot of times what you're going to have to watch out for, Ashton Daniels, obviously with this RPO game, you want to see how he factors into it. Keeping the run game simple, so being able to have simplified runs, RPOs, different things like that. Chris Jones, I kind of want to see him being able to be active there with Mandrell Desir, because I think Mandrell's going to take a lot of double teams this year. What is his twin brother, Darrell, going to do, in a sense of pass rushing abilities? So, and then Rylan Kennedy at the jack position. Nick Williams had talked about it before. The jack position has not really been able to be utilized at Florida State. And this is the first year they're able to actually get that position under wraps. So I think a lot of times, too, Florida State's going to have those couple of things to watch for. But everybody wants to know about a score prediction, what Florida State's going to do this year. And guess what, man? I have Florida State winning 45-13. I think they're barely going to escape the spread, and I think it's going to be about a 45-7 game. Or the reserves are going to be taken into the game, going to kind of allow a couple field goals, maybe even a 14 score, maybe another touchdown or so. But I do think this is going to be a comfortable win for Florida State. You're going to probably be up by 28, maybe even 24 points at halftime and kind of cruise to the end of the victory. And being able to get your starters out in the early third quarter, I think is going to be a big factor for Florida State. I don't think they're going to put this game into, flea flickers and reverses and different things like that. It's going to be a very simplified game. That's why I don't think Florida State's going to score as much as you would possibly think, because I think they're going to save a lot of it for SMU the next week. But let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are of this game. Do you think, what is your score prediction going to be? And also, are you going to be going to the game? If you are, let me know. Comment down if you're going to the game. Let me know on Instagram. Whatever the case is, let me know you're coming so I can go up and just meet with you. I think that's a great thing to have a community of Florida State fans that you can meet, talk to. Because guess what? We're all in this suffering together. You want to see Florida State be successful. I think that's going to be a big factor of what Florida State's going to do this year. But I appreciate all the love and support so far. I know I'm going to have great videos coming out pretty soon. This is just kind of a short little preview I wanted to kind of put up on my channel before I'm able to travel tomorrow. But I appreciate all the love and support. And as always, go Noles.